The world's most disgusting story ever. Written and read by Shan McFadden. You may have heard some disgusting stories before. Stories about vomit or diarrhea or boogers or things like that. You may have heard stories that would make you feel sick if you heard them right after eating a big meal. But have you heard the world's most disgusting story ever? It's an awful story, really, a horrible story, filled with smelly, sticky, gooey, gross, foul, and generally repugnant things. You probably won't like it, unless you have a strong stomach, but if you're curious, I can tell you a little bit more. In a way, I'm surprised that you haven't heard this story before, because it took place not far from here in a town called Muffinville, a town that got its name from the sweet smell that pervaded every nook and cranny of its charming streets. On most days, Muffinville smelled exactly like fresh-baked muffins. But on the day of this story, a scorchingly hot day in fact, the town didn't smell like muffins at all. Instead, it smelled like rotting garbage. The reason for the putrid stench was this. Muffinville, being a small town, had only one garbage truck, and that garbage truck had broken down. So the people of Muffinville piled their bags of refuse by the side of the road, expecting in good faith that their moldy rubbish would be hauled away. They were shocked to find that it simply sat there, baking in the hot sun, getting smellier and yuckier and more grossly stinktacular by the minute. Great heroes are often born out of difficult times, and that's the case with the hero of this story, a teenaged girl named Pearl Pennyfeather. Pearl had long red hair which she wore in pigtails, a freckly face, and a huge set of bright white teeth that were almost always visible, as she was almost always smiling. Pearl was the kind of person you'd want around if you were shipwrecked on a desert island, or lost in the woods, or trapped in a pharaoh's tomb. She was bright and resourceful, brave, inventive, and kind, and she always did the right thing, even when it was difficult. On this day, Pearl was true to form. She stepped out of her front door, smelled the stench of rotting garbage in the air, and decided that something had to be done about it. So she took her father's tractor, hooked it up to his hay wagon, and set out to resolve the Muffinville garbage crisis right then and there. First she loaded her parents' garbage onto the wagon, then all the garbage on her street, and then all of the garbage in her neighborhood. And it was only when the wagon was filled from front to back with smelly, bloated garbage bags that she stopped her route and set off for the local dump. As she passed, her friends and neighbors cheered her on and shouted encouragement, but Pearl was so humble and modest that all she could do was smile and blush. Along the way, she made many stops and picked up a variety of horrible and disgusting things. First, she helped Farmer Scruggs with his manure heap, which had been piled up so high that it threatened to topple over and crush a nearby chicken coop. Thinking quickly, Pearl backed her tractor up and gave the pile a hard shove, which caused half of the festering cow pies to land with a splat on top of the garbage bags in the back of the wagon. Farmer Scruggs thanked her profusely, but all Pearl could do was blush and smile, and say, "Think nothing of it, sir. But just so you know, the Farmers Coalition recommends that you limit your manure piles to 8 feet, just for safety reasons, of course." And then she was off. Next, she picked up 8 loads of dirty diapers from Mrs. Vanderhooten, the mother of the famous Vanderhooten octuplets. Surrounded by her 8 crying babies, the frazzled mother expressed her heartfelt gratitude, while Pearl dumped 8 pails full of poopy, pea-soaked diapers on top of the putrefied manure in the back of the wagon. But all Pearl could do was smile and blush and say, "No problem at all, ma'am. I'm glad to help. But you might want to consider switching to cloth diapers. They're economical and more friendly for the environment." And then she was off. Shortly thereafter, she stopped at the Cheswick Cheese Factory and loaded up the wagon with 50 pounds of spoiled cheese. The intense heat of the day, combined with the refrigeration problem in the plant, had caused the cheese to be transformed into a sticky, gooey, horrible mess, with a stench so funky that a number of employees had actually passed out after catching a good whiff of it. Mr. Cheswick, the factory owner, thanked Pearl for her kindness and generosity, but warned her against the debilitating stink of the rotten cheese. But Pearl only smiled and blushed. Then she reached into her pocket and produced a clothespin which she clipped on her nose as she said, "Not to worry, sir. I've got this situation under control." Minutes later, she was pouring buckets of the gooey, revolting orange glop on top of the dirty diapers in the back of the wagon. And then she was off. And as Pearl's helpfulness persisted, so the mound of muck and mire in the back of the wagon continued to grow. At every stop along the way, Pearl found someone with something horrible that they just couldn't get rid of. And of course, Pearl being Pearl, she had no choice but to help out by carting the offensive items away. To her already impressive load of nasty items, she added a pile of smelly fish heads from the fish market, 10 mushy old pumpkins and 6 dozen rotten eggs from the supermarket, 8 loaves of moldy bread from the bakery, a vat of sheep brains and pig intestines from the butcher shop, a bag of dirty greasy hair from the styling salon, a large pail of toenail clippings and earwax from the old folks' home, and a bucket full of dog vomit from the veterinary clinic. Then she topped off the pile with a filthy pair of underpants she'd found lying in the middle of the road. By this point, the wagon was packed so full of horrible, smelly, and revolting substances that it sloshed and slurped and burped and blorted every time it went over a bump. Realizing that she simply couldn't carry any more refuse, Pearl headed straight to the dump, hauling her putrescent payload behind her. Now, it's important for me to mention that in order for Pearl to reach the dump, she needed to pass through the center of downtown Muffinville. This meant that she needed to drive down from the top of Hill Street and right past the town hall. Ordinarily, this wouldn't be a big concern, especially since she was performing such a valuable public service. But her timing on this day was a bit unfortunate. You see, a small crowd had gathered in front of the town hall in anticipation of the mayor's upcoming speech. The mayor had recently been re-elected for an unheard-of 5th term, and while most of the townspeople disliked the mayor and suspected that his re-election had come as a result of dubious measures, it did nothing to dampen his celebratory demeanor on this day. The crowd, which was smaller than the mayor would have liked because, as I said, most people hated him, consisted of a television reporter and a cameraman, the photographer from the local paper, a 12-piece marching band, the mayor's wife, the chief of police, and an old man with a cane that had mistakenly believed the crowd to be a lineup for the bathroom. The mayor stood on his podium and grinned at the crowd while the band played for He's a Jolly Good Fellow. He preened and cleared his throat and chuckled to himself as he prepared to give his speech, unaware that a wagon filled with horrible stinky grossness was about to pass right by and ruin his celebration. But that's all we need to say about the mayor because he's really not an important character in the story. It's Pearl's story after all, not the mayor's, and we should really be getting back to her. So as Pearl headed down Hill Street, she could hear the sound of a band playing in the distance.
Hey, you up there! Hey, Big Nose!
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, are you talking to me?
You see anybody else with a big nose around here, you half-wit nincompoop?
Mr. Mayor, that type of talk is very offensive, and besides, I don't think my nose is that big.
Who cares how big your nose is, Big Nose? I heard what you said about me. You said I'm not an important character in this story. Who the heck do you think you are saying that about me, the mayor of Muffinville, on the biggest day in Muffinville history?
Mr. Mayor, I didn't mean any offense. It's just that this story is about Pearl Pennyfeather, and...
Pearl Pennyfeather? That gangly, ginger-haired buffoon? No one cares about her. Don't you know whose big day this is? It's my big day. I'm the mayor of Muffinville, and this huge crowd is here to celebrate my true awesomeness.
Well, to be honest, Mr. Bear, it's not that big of a crowd.
What's that, Big Nose? Do you need some huge glasses to fit over that gigantic nose of yours?
Listen, Mr. Mayor, I'd really appreciate it if you'd stop calling me Big Nose.
And I'd appreciate it if you'd tell this story the way it's meant to be told, with me as the main character, depicted in my full, breathtaking, and legendary brilliance. Think a crappy writer like you can handle that, Big Nose?
Yes, sir. Oh, yeah, I think I might just be able to do that.
Fine then, but make it snappy, 'cause I'm paying that band by the hour.
Oh, of course. I'll get on it right away, Mr. Mayor.
And you make this story all about me, right?
Oh, yes, sir. You're going to be the center of attention from now on.
Good, just as it should be. Well, get on with it then. I haven't got all day.
Of course, Mr. Mayor. No problem. So as Pearl headed down Hill Street, she could hear the sound of a band playing in the distance.
Wait a minute, you just said this story was going to be all about me, not Pearl. What's her name? What are you playing at, Big Nose?
Patience, Mr. Mayor, patience. We're just building up some suspense before your big entrance.
Oh, yes, of course. Build up the expectation, eh? Yes. Someone like me deserves a dramatic entrance. After all, I'm the main character, and this is my big day.
Of course it is, Mr. Mayor. Now you just relax and enjoy your celebration, and don't worry. You'll get what's coming to you soon enough."
Well, good, good. That's what I wanted to hear. Yes, it's my big day.
All right, so where was I? Right, okay. So as Pearl headed down Hill Street, she could hear the sound of a band playing in the distance. She squinted into the sun and stared all the way down the hill and saw the small crowd. I mean, the huge crowd that had assembled in front of the town hall. She could see the brass band, she could see the television crew, she could see the photographer, and she could see the mayor standing proudly at his podium and waving to the onlookers. And because Pearl was such a kind and considerate girl, and because she knew that her wagon full of stinky filth would ruin the moment, she said,
"Well, I just can't risk spoiling the mayor's big day, so I'm not taking this wagon 1 inch further until the party's over. In fact, I think I'll just turn the whole thing around and take the long way to the dump."
So that's what she did. She turned the wheel of her tractor as sharply as she could, turned the overflowing wagon completely around, and started heading back up Hill Street. And everything would have worked out wonderfully for everyone if only the wagon hadn't been so heavy, and if only the hill hadn't been so very, very steep. Instead, what happened was this. The trailer hitch snapped, the wagon broke free, and a gargantuan load of garbage, cow manure, dirty diapers, spoiled cheese, fish heads, mushy pumpkins, rotten eggs, moldy bread, sheep brains, pig intestines, greasy hair, toenail clippings, earwax, dog vomit, and filthy underwear went barreling down the hill toward the town hall and the mayor's victory celebration. A huge scream went up from the crowd as they saw the wagon hurtling toward them. The brass band scattered and the television crew leaped for cover. The mayor's wife hid behind the chief of police, and the chief of police hid behind the old man who thought he was lined up for the toilets. The old man said, "Hot dog, now I'm at the front of the line." The mayor looked up the hill at the wagon careening toward him with a mixture of terror and rage. He raised his fist and shouted,
What's the meaning of this? This is my story and this is my big day.
Then he paused and gave a very thoughtful look and said,
Wait a minute. This is my big day. I'm the most important character in this story, so this must be my moment of heroic triumph.
He turned to the horrified crowd and said,
Relax, everyone, relax. I, your brave and noble mayor, am here to protect you, because this is my big day, and nothing is going to ruin my big day.
The mayor stood with his hands on his hips and struck a heroic pose as he defiantly stared down the wagon speeding wildly toward him. In his eyes was a look of complete confidence. He knew in his heart that no matter what happened, the wagon would not hit him. And in a way he was correct, because the wagon didn't hit him at all. Instead, it collided violently with a fire hydrant and spewed its horrible contents straight up into the air. For a moment, the foul mixture of rubbish and crud hung in the air like a repugnant, smelly cloud, blocking out the sun with its detestable wretchedness. The mayor stared up into the gunk-ridden sky with disbelief, his mouth hanging open as the realization of his fate finally dawned upon him. Then he was struck in the face with a filthy pair of underpants, drenched with dog vomit, pelted with earwax and toenail clippings, peppered with dirty, greasy hair, smeared with sheep brains, plastered with pig intestines, hammered with moldy bread, lambasted with rotten eggs, pummeled with mushy pumpkins, walloped with smelly fish heads, showered in spoiled cheese, doused in dirty diapers, splattered in cow manure, and finally bombarded with dozens of garbage bags, all of which split open, oozing their noxious cargo on top of the already huge mound of rottenness. And the last thing he said as he was buried in sickening slop was,
This was supposed to be my story.
For a moment, the shocked crowd stood in hushed silence and stared at the giant mountain of nauseating slime that now occupied the space where the mayor had been only moments before. There was no sign of him, buried beneath the massive pile of goop, and no sound except for the hiss of the leaking fire hydrant and the buzzing of hungry flies. Then the reporter looked at the cameraman, and the cameraman looked at the chief of police, and the chief of police looked at the mayor's wife, and the mayor's wife looked at the photographer, but no one did anything. Then the photographer looked at the tuba player, and the tuba player looked at the trombone player, and the trombone player looked at the drummer, and the drummer looked at the old man, but no one did anything. And Pearl, who had just sprinted down from the top of Hill Street, saw everyone looking at each other and not doing anything, and realized that not one person was willing to get close enough to the horrible heap to save the mayor, not even the mayor's wife. And then Pearl, being Pearl, knew what she had to do. She kicked off her shoes and pulled off her clothespin and ran full tilt toward the garbage mound. Then she leaped into the air, did 1 1/4 flips, and performed a perfect swan dive into the top of the muck pile. She disappeared without a sound into the gooey mess, and then all was still. The mayor's wife gasped and looked at the reporter. The reporter gasped and looked at the tuba player. The tuba player gasped and looked at the cameraman. The cameraman gasped and looked at the chief of police. The chief of police gasped and looked at the old man. The old man gasped and said, "Gosh darn it, I waited too long and now I've peed my pants." But no one did anything. Then the photographer took a cautious step forward and clicked a quick picture of the still and silent hill of refuse and said, "I think she's done for." But then a hand erupted from the stinky sludge, and then an arm, and then a shoulder, and then a face, and then a head, and then 2 long pigtails, and then Pearl Pennyfeather took a deep, gasping breath and dragged herself free of the scummy, sludgy mass. Under her arm was the unconscious form of the mayor. "He's not breathing," cried the cameraman as he zoomed in for a close-up. "Someone needs to administer CPR," yelled the reporter as she scribbled down notes. "Well, don't look at me," shouted the chief of police as he pinched his nose to block out the awful stink. "Or me," shrieked the mayor's wife as she threw up into her purse. So Pearl wiped the slime off of her face and off of the mayor's face too, and then she gave him mouth to mouth while the frightened and disgusted crowd waited in anticipation. Finally the mayor gave a low moan and then coughed up a puddle of greenish-orange gunk. The crowd applauded while Pearl gave a sigh of relief and wiped a smear of earwax from her forehead. The mayor, who'd always been a mean and selfish man, lay on his back amid the dirty diapers and cow manure, the spoiled cheese and the rotten eggs, and thanked his lucky stars for his new lease on life. He vowed to change his ways and to be a good mayor and a decent, humble man. And he decided to start right there and then by thanking the brave young girl who had risked her life to save him. As he opened his mouth to speak, he looked up into Pearl's earnest face and noticed an odd look in her eyes. They were glassed over, and her skin was taking on a green tinge, and her eyelids were fluttering. And then the smell of the fish heads and the mushy pumpkins and the rotten garbage finally took their toll. And Pearl Pennyfeather, the brave and noble girl that she was, vomited right on the mayor's face. The mayor leaped to his feet, screaming and running in circles as he clawed at his eyes and mouth. He ran right past the cameraman and the reporter, right past the photographer, right past the chief of police, and right past his wife. And he just kept running until no one at town hall could see him anymore, although they could still hear his horrible shrieks fading off into the distance. He was never seen again after that day, although there were many stories told about his fate. Some say he ran straight into the lake and swam all the way to Buffalo. Some say he headed north until he got stuck on an ice floe up at the North Pole. But whatever the truth was, it didn't matter, because Muffinville needed a new mayor, and the people of Muffinville knew exactly who that mayor should be. Because of her bravery, her quick thinking, and her sense of selfless service, Pearl Pennyfeather was appointed the new mayor of Muffinville. As you would expect, she did a great job and was beloved by all of the townspeople. And when people talked of that day and told the most disgusting story ever, they always made a point of mentioning how brave Pearl was and what a jerk the former mayor was. So I end this story with a quick word of warning. If you ever find yourself as a character in someone else's story, it's probably a good idea to be nice to them. Because you never know how that story is going to turn out. And by the way, my nose is not that big.
This story was written and read by Shan McFadden. Music by the New York Brass.